Okay, we're on to the next section, which begins the cooking section. In this section, we're going to talk about pouring, measuring technique, cutting, chopping, slicing, peeling, those type of things. The toaster, the microwave, stove, oven, testing for doneness when you're cooking, and recipes. With cooking, just like with everything else, but especially with cooking, organization is the key. The student has got to learn to be organized. When cooking, it's appropriate to use your fingers. We all do it. If we're mixing up a meatloaf, we might put our fingers in it. The trick is, though, you have to teach the student to wash their hands before they start, not to be touching their face, their hair, not to be eating as they go. Really emphasize type of things. Pouring, there's two difficulties that people have with pouring. The one is locating the edge of the pitcher. Often people try to pour and they miss. They're too far over or under. And the other is determining the level of fullness, making sure that they don't overflow. There are three methods for pouring. I'm going to kind of quickly go through them. One is where the pitcher and the cup actually make contact and you pick them both up off the table. Another one is the pitcher stays on the table and the cup just comes up to the spout. And the other is the cup stays on the table and the spout comes down to the cup. Any method works. You really just have to decide with your student what's going to be best for them. But you have to emphasize that they have to make physical contact. That prevents the missing the cup, and we'll talk about now how to prevent things from overflowing. There's multiple ways to do this. One is just putting your finger in the edge of the cup as you pour and feeling for the liquid. You're going to need to teach the student, though, that this might be all right for them, but not necessarily all right for company. Other things that you can do are there are different gadgets available out there. There's a thing called, I think one catalog calls it a liquid level indicator, another calls it a say when. It's a device that has two metal prongs that you can stick in a cup or a glass and pour. And it makes a sound when it gets full. It does get pretty close to the top, though, so you have to teach the student to pour slowly if you're going to use this. Something I haven't emphasized enough early on is I'm showing you lots of gadgets and different ways to do things. If you can avoid using a gadget, it's best to not use it, because then the student becomes dependent on them. Try to teach things without gadgets, but sometimes they're necessary. Let me pour this back in here. Often with this little liquid level indicator, make sure you have the student touch it and hear the sound before you start, because some students it will just startle a whole lot when they hear it. Other things you can do, I have a fishing bobber with a string on it. You can put ping pong balls, corks, and watch them float as they come up. Something else you can do is the sensory integration approach, which is actually a good method for students to learn, is where they're actually listening for the sound of the water as it rises. It takes practice. They're actually, if they're lifting the cup up, feeling for the weight of the cup. It kind of combines hearing and feeling to do it. What I often have people do is teach this using the same cup at first over and over, and when they get done with that, go on to a different type of cup. There are other gadgets and devices out there. There's something called a hot shot, which kind of looks like a little coffee pot, which you can use to heat up water, and put that in it, and you push a button on it, and it just dispenses 1 cup of water at a time. That's something that the student really needs some assistance with this. Make students aware of different types of pitchers, make them aware of different kinds of cups. Use contrast when they're pouring. If it's a dark liquid with a light cup, works great. Glasses sometimes, if they just put a dark towel underneath and it's milk, that'll help. I've even had people stand up if they have dark colored cabinets to hold it up in front of the dark cabinet when they're pouring to create that contrast. Whatever it takes. Typically, though, when you start, have the student pour over top of a tray and have paper towels or dishcloth ready to clean up, so that it alleviates some of that fear of, oh, if I spill, it's going to run all over the place, so that they know, hey, it's no big deal, we're just practicing, it's right in the tray. Start with pitchers that have a really pronounced spout, and then go to things that don't have a good spout. Probably one of the last things to do is a milk jug. That's a pretty difficult, tricky technique. So do that last. Start with cold water, obviously, as opposed to hot water. Use rug stop if you have to keep the glass from sliding. And those are pretty much the tips for pouring. We're here talking about measuring. When you're doing measuring with anything else, you want to assess the student's skills first and find out what their needs are. If they don't need these devices marked, don't mark them. Because again, the fewer gadgets, the better. Let's talk about the different devices I have. Again, I have a measuring tray here, or a tray, and I like this to do my measuring over top of and do most of the cooking that we're going to do over top of the tray, so that if the student spills something, it's in a nice confined area to clean up. First things I have are some graduated measuring cups. I've got a black set and a white set. I like to have two sets if possible, so that if you're measuring milk, flour, things that are light in color, you can use the dark cups, or if they're dark, you can use the white cups, especially if the student has low vision. I have these marked with cuff paint. On the one cup, I just have one dot. The half cup, 2 dots. Third cup's 3 dots. Fourth cup, 4 dots. On my white set, I have lines. There's lines or dots are fine. It's just a matter of what the student can feel better, and I just have an example of each for them to feel. You can mark liquid measuring cups with lines if you need to. This isn't the best example, but I do have a long line at half a cup and a long line at 1 cup, and then I'm marking it a fourth, a third, and 2/3. Some students visually, if you just put a marking on them, that's how you do the measuring. If the student has trouble visually seeing these, though, don't use the liquid measuring cup at all, and just use these graduated ones. You'll occasionally find somebody who will say, oh, these are only supposed to be for dry ingredients. You really can use them for dry or wet. You don't want to have too many measuring cups and too many different styles, because it gets too much to keep track of. But I also often like to have a set for dry and a set for liquid, so that if you measure milk in here and then went and stuck it in your flour, it's not getting stuck all over. So these ones are tactually marked. You could actually mark them with permanent marker on the bottom. With the permanent marker, over time it does wear off, so you have to occasionally keep remarking them. Again, if they can tell them apart without the markings, though, don't mark them. I have a set of bent measuring cups. These work great for liquid items. We'll explain that more in a minute. I've got sets of measuring spoons, but I want to show you I marked in a similar manner. I have a line made with high marks on the tablespoon. I have 1 dot on the teaspoon with high marks, 2 dots on the half teaspoon, and 4 on the 4th teaspoon. I have a set that's straight and a set that's bent. The idea with the bent measuring spoons and cups is with liquid items. If you're trying to measure vanilla, liquid vanilla, trying to pour liquid vanilla into the measuring spoon can be real difficult. But if you store it in a wide-mouth container, the student can then use the bent spoon, if they needed a tablespoon of vanilla, to dip down in the container, lift it up out, and then pour into the bowl. The trick with this, though, is students often bend them and it all runs right out. You have to teach the student how to keep it level. Sometimes just keeping it along the edge of the container will help. It really takes some practice, though, to do this. Same idea with the measuring cups. If they needed water, they could put the water in a bowl and use the bent cups to do it. You have to really teach them, though, too, that the bowl that they're pouring into or measuring into needs to be right beside what they measure, so that they dip down in, and then they just have to go right beside it to dump. So even if they're a foot apart, sometimes by the time they get over there, it has spilled out. Baby food jars work great for this. You can't get a tablespoon measuring spoon into there, but 3 teaspoons will equal a tablespoon, so they could use that. I don't tend to like Tupperware containers that pop off, because when you go to open it up, the liquid splatters out. So screw tops are better. There are some things like maybe vanilla, soy sauce that they might use a lot. They could transfer to another container and then use one of their labeling systems to identify it. If it's something they don't use that much, it's good to have in their measuring kit or measuring devices a little funnel so that they could actually pour it into a cup, measure, put this back into the container, and dump the liquid back in. Again, you're using over top the tray. Another tip that I often like is even cooking is having 2 trays so that if you're doing, let's say, flour, I'm going to use this, and they dip down in with their flour, let's do one thing. They can actually use their finger, if their finger's clean, and just level it off, and that's actually a good way at times, because then they can actually feel that what they've measured is full. Sometimes students will dip down in there and only get a half of what they're measuring. So a finger's a nice way to feel it's full, but they could use the back of a knife also to level it off. And again, whatever they're measuring into should be close to where they're going to dump it. I mentioned the tray and working over the top of the tray, and the reason for this is I just got flour on my hand. I've got it on the outside of this container. If you work over one tray and then have a second tray, you can do your measuring on that tray, tap the container, put your lid on it, tap it, and move it off to the side. And then work on the other one. So you're doing your measuring here, maybe, and then dumping into the second tray. This tray is just where they're making a mess. If they do everything right on this tray, sometimes it transfers to everything else. Let's see. I think those are the best tips for measuring. Again, it's okay to use their fingers, but they have to keep those hands clean. Another important point is encourage the student to always either wear an apron or to wear a towel hooked into their pocket so that as they're using their hands, they can actually wipe their hands off onto the towel and go on to the next test. If the student needs to measure something like butter, a lot of recipes call for 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons, half stick. Using just a regular old butter knife is a good thing. On your actual stick of butter, they have the markings for tablespoons, but if you can't see that, a way they could do it is the width of a table knife typically is about 1 tablespoon. So they can actually lay the knife down on the edge, stand it up, slice, and that'll give them exactly a tablespoon of butter. And from there, you can get half a cup, it all breaks down. Now we're going to talk a little bit about cutting. This is a technique that often teachers are very fearful about teaching or makes them very nervous. And you want to be real careful that you don't transfer your fear or your nervousness about the technique to your student. You want them to feel confident about doing this skill. You want them to be realistic about their abilities, but at the same time, you want them to feel that they can do this. But to start, you always want to assess your students' needs and their skill level and their needs, and go from there. Some things, if a student really isn't safe to use a knife and it's something that maybe they really just aren't going to be able to master due to other things other than vision loss, there are other things you can use for chopping. Blenders work great, food processors work great. There are different gadgets where you can buy a jar that you put the food in. Maybe you only have to cut it into chunks, and then you use this to cut it into smaller pieces. There's another food chopper. There's all kind of ones like this where you actually put just the chunks of food down and then use this to chop. These are great things. There's vegetable peelers. I really like to use those for peeling potatoes, carrots, even apples will work. I like the ones with the wide handle. It's easier for a student. Some of them are really hard for the student to identify which way the blade is on what they're peeling. The wide handle ones help them with placement. And the great thing about these is you can buy the same one for like $10 in some of the kitchen stores, or you can buy one at the Dollar Tree for $1, and really they're both about the same thing. There are all kind of gadgets out there. I've got a bagel a device that you can put a bagel in, and it actually has slots that the knife fits into the slots. I didn't open it up, but they sell gadgets like this. They sell blocks where you can put a loaf of bread in there, and the knife fits in between the two indentations to cut the bread. There are all kind of ways you can get around cutting if the student has difficulty. But again, the fewer gadgets, the better. There are two methods for cutting, or there's multiple methods, actually, for everything we're doing today. I'm just focusing on some main ones. The two main methods I'm going to show you today involve using a chef's knife. And a chef's knife is just a knife with a big, wide blade. You can, when you're cutting, contrast can be very important. You can get black cutting boards, white cutting boards, but even if the student is using vision to do this, you don't want them so focused on trying to see to do it that they make it unsafe. They have to be consistent in their technique. With the chef knife, what I often have people do, or the one method, is they take their finger and they use their finger to measure back the size of what they want to cut. With this, I have a carrot, and I've put my finger at the end, and I'm sliding it back to measure the size of what I'm going to cut. Or you can even use the point of your knuckle at the end and slide back to the size you want. Or if the student has difficulty with that, they can put their finger on it, put their knife at the edge of what they're cutting, turn the knife backwards so the top part comes up to their finger and the blade's away from them towards the end of the carrot, slide it towards their finger, and then their knuckle is touching the wide part of the blade, but the tip of their finger's out of the way, and then they slice. I'm going to just demonstrate that several times. Often, I'm going to stand up, and you may only be able to see my hands, and that's all right. It's easier to cut if the student has leverage. And I'm sliding my knuckle back so that the tip of my finger's out of the way. I'm sliding the blade of the knife along the carrots. They can feel the size of the piece of carrot they're cutting and pushing down. So the actual blade of the knife is measuring the size that they're cutting. But at no time is my finger near where I'm cutting. If the student has trouble with this, they can actually measure, kind of push into the carrot a little bit, lift their hand up out of the way altogether, put their hand on top of the blade, and push down. And then they measure again, lift up, push down. Put their knuckle on top, measure again, slide with that knife, lift their hand up, push down. Sometimes that's a better thing because when you're leaving your knuckle down there, which is a fine way to do it, the part that often if people get a finger in the way, it's the thumb. They want to curl the thumb back towards the handle of the knife. And you've got to make sure they keep that thumb back out of the way. A sharp knife is much better than a dull knife. A lot of people think it's safer to have a dull knife, but then it makes them have to fight and things start to rock. A sharp knife is much, much better. When cutting, you want to teach the student to always lay their knife down in the same place, in the same position every time, because you don't want them to be randomly searching for that knife. You want them to know, if I reach right here, I have the knife handle, and there's no danger of touching the blade. But it has to be consistent. I kind of touched on the other method of putting your hand on top. Some students, if they're having difficulty with this, you can have them keep their hand out of the way altogether and just keep, with the chef's knife, it's wide enough that they can just keep their hand on top and keep slicing. They may even need to slice a couple pieces and then lay them back down and do the same thing over. Now, students often have spatial orientation problems when they're first doing this, so I'm just doing this nice and easy because I've done it a lot. You're really going to have to teach them to feel and put things back together and just get used to the feel of this. Carrots are a good thing to start with. Potatoes can be good. Potatoes roll sometimes. You may even want to cut the potato in half for them to start and put the flat sides down and then practice with that part till they get better. I talked about laying the knife down consistently. Something else I like to do is have a coffee can and use it so that if they cut the ends of the carrot off, then they can put the scraps right into the coffee can right there. So as they go, the scraps are there. This cutting board's pretty big. Sometimes a smaller cutting board's even easier, so that they can keep the scrap can right on top, right on the tray, and everything can stay confined in this area. Let me think. Dice them or rug stop again if their cutting board's sliding can be a good thing that can be helpful. You also want to emphasize when they're putting the knife away, in the drawer it should always go in the same spot. In the dishwasher, the points should be down. Consistency in placement. This is easy if the student lives alone in a vacuum, but of course our students don't. So, that you also have to work with the family on this, and also train the student that family members might not always do this, so that they have to be very cautious when they're looking for the knife and so forth. Now I want to just do a couple brief things, say a few things about a toaster and the microwave. With the toaster, if you can use toaster tongs, sometimes that can be helpful. With the microwave, make sure obviously you only use microwavable safe dishes. If you have to mark your microwave, the fewer markings the better, and make sure the student's really involved with that marking. And use oven mitts to take things in and out of the microwave, even though oftentimes people think things don't get too hot, the pans don't get hot enough to burn you, they actually will. And there's something called an oven glove. They're hard to find, but you can find them often in many stores like Rite Aid and Kmart at Christmas time. Those work real good for the microwave. Then let's also talk briefly about the stove top. You want to start on a cold stove to start. What students often have trouble with is centering a pan that won't have it on there correctly. A couple things you can have them do is, one, many students can just look. Does it look level? If they can't see that, they can feel. Does it feel level? Other things you can do is have them turn it on and feel, about chest level or chin level. Feel above the pan as it's on. If it's not centered, there will be more heat in one area than another. If it's centered on the burner, they shouldn't really feel any intense heat at any one spot. And it's best to try to obviously use a pan that's closest to the size of the burner. One technique you can have students do is use a wooden spoon to run around the edge of the burner. Of the pan, they can feel the burner. If they go the whole way around, they really shouldn't feel much of the burner. But you need to stress with them that it needs to be a wooden spoon, and they can't leave it sitting on there for a long time. It's got to be a pretty quick feel around there. If it's a gas stove without a manual start, you want to make sure that they're using the right devices to light it. Matches are not safe. It's better to use one of the butane lighters. Some of them have the safety that are, and some just that safety makes it hard to turn them on for some students. You really want to experiment with different. Let's talk about the oven now. You want to always start teaching this skill on a cold oven to start with. You want to have the student open it up, check to see where their racks are located, check and make sure that their racks lock in place. When practicing, you want to put something in your pan or in your dish to simulate weight. This one, I actually have a phone book in here just to simulate the weight. You want to have whatever they're putting into the oven located near the oven. If you can't put it right on top of your stove, even off to the side, but somewhere close by. Oven mitts that go up to their elbows are great. With a small child, if you buy the regular size oven mitts, they'll go up to their elbows. They have ones that are flame retardant and flame resistant. They're in some of the specialty catalogs. Those are really good ones to start with or to use. When doing this, you want to have the students stand to the side this way that if they're standing in front, and I'm not going to stand here for a long time, they have to reach over top the hot door to put things in and out, and they're more likely to get burned. By standing to the side, it's really safer. You want them to open the door to let the blast of hot air out, then lower the door the rest of the way. You want them to put their hand in the front of the oven, trail down till they locate the rack, pull the rack out till it locks, lift up their pan, bring their pan straight down onto the rack. They might even want to push it in a little bit so that it's not going to fall off the front. Push the oven rack in, then feel down for the door, trail up to the end, and push the door shut. When they're taking it out, it's going to be the same thing in reverse. They have to remember to feel for that blast of hot air, open the door the whole way. Again, you don't want them just to reach in, because this is where people end up getting their arm burned. You want them to trail down the front of the oven and locate that rack. Pull the rack out, lift their pan up, have a spot predetermined where they're going to set it before they begin, whether they have hot pads set to put it on. Trail back down, feel that rack, push it in, close the door. A final note with oven and stove cooking. With timing, there are all kind of commercial timers available. As I showed earlier, you can tactually mark timers. I didn't put a marking at the stop part of this one because it actually has a tactual spot. But you could mark a timer for them. You could buy a commercial timer. Some people will use the length of a TV show. Maybe it's a half-hour show. They know it needs to cook for a half hour. They put it in the oven, and when the show's done, they take it out. In the Foundation of RT book, there's, I think I listed it in the PowerPoint page. There's a great list of techniques of ways to tell how things are done or not, and really look over that page. I want to talk briefly about some recipes for cooking. You'll get a list of recipes from me that are some good starter recipes. Keep in mind that there's multiple other things that you could use, and that the recipes, you may have to adapt them for your student and add more detail or take out detail. They're just good beginner things. Some of the recipes have multiple tasks in them, so you really want to look at what skill you want to be teaching, and is it a good recipe to start with, or do you have to help the student with part of it and just focus on that one section. One thing I like to use, and I actually learned this from another instructor, is making an angel food cake. Betty Crocker sells this angel food cake, and there's some other ones that they sell that are Betty Crockers that just add water. This is a great beginning quick lesson that you could do like in 45 minutes from beginning to end. You get a Ziploc bag. I like the ones with the zipper. That's easier for the student to know when it's open and closed. You dump this into the bag. You take, I think it's a half a cup of water. You have to look at the back of the instructions, and dump it in. Zip up your bag. Mix it up by hand. Lay it down on the table, the bag. Push the mixture back away from the corner. Snip off the corner of the bag. Put it into a bread pan and squeeze the cake mix out into the pan. Shake the pan so it's level. Then you can put it in and out of the oven, and it's done. So it's a really nice one to start. Some students often have a hard time doing, though, is actually putting this right over top of the pan. They might even need to rest their arms on it in the beginning to know that it's centered, and then lift up and squeeze. That part you'll have to work on. So it's Betty Crocker Angel Food Cake. That's a good beginning oven lesson. Some other beginning oven lessons, such as caramel apples, the raffles that you can put around them. They're harder to find, but around Halloween you can find them. Pretzels that you do in the oven, roasted pumpkin seeds, refrigerator biscuits. There's a variety of recipes in the packet that you'll get that are good. There's all kind of commercially available things, and it's important to teach students the techniques for doing things from scratch and teaching them about healthy eating and healthy cooking, but at the same time, you need to get something that you can start and finish in one quick lesson and the time that you're going to have at school, as well as students often go off to college and maybe they've learned to cut and they've learned to pour and they've learned to measure, but they haven't learned any actual things that they can cook and eat, so they end up doing a lot of fast food. So you want to find some things that they're really going to spend the time and make. There are many healthy things, or relatively healthy things, that you can buy. There's all kind of frozen stuffed shells, tortellini. These are great. You put them in a pan, dump the sauce on, put them in the oven, take them out, and it looks like you made a fancy meal. Another one are these, I don't know even how you say the name of it. It's Antioch Farms. They make all kinds of little chicken things that you can use. You can put them in the oven, or they work great in the microwave. I like to put these in the microwave for 1.5 to 2 minutes. Take them out, pour a little spaghetti sauce on them, do them another 30 seconds, and they're done. And they're really good. These oven poppers, I do list these on the PowerPoint. Fish, they're really nice. They're a little more expensive, but they make nice meals. If you just look in your freezer section, there are all kinds of really quick, easy, nice things that you can make. From, there's canned soups, there's steakums. Look for things that are somewhat healthy, but at the same time, quick, simple, that you can do in a lesson, and the student actually has some things that they can come away with cooking. Some of the recipes in that pack, there's one that's making bread in a bread machine. It's a great measuring lesson. There's a banana bread recipe in there. It's a much more complex recipe, but it's a good measuring lesson. In there's directions for making a taped recipe. And that's also in the book, and I list what pages that's at in Foundations of RT. Really read over that. It's real important when you're making a recipe for a student on tape that you follow a certain format. When you're reading a recipe in the book, it'll actually say, 3 cups milk, 1/2 cup sugar, and then when it's telling you in the directions telling you what to do, it just says add milk, sugar, butter. You need to repeat the ingredients and the amounts so that the student doesn't have to rewind the tape back to see, how much milk. So really look over those instructions. Emphasize the student before they begin cooking to get all the food out and everything out they need to begin. And that should pretty much cover it. I do list in the PowerPoint a cookbook that I like to use. There's many cookbooks out there. You don't have to use that one. It's the 4 Ingredients Cookbook. It's basically everything in there. Uses only 4 ingredients, so it's a good beginner cookbook. So if you're analyzing or looking at cookbooks, look for simple step